أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم المصطفى الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما والحمد لله على كل حال سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم إني أعوذ بك أن أدل أو دل أو زل أو زل أو أذلم أو أذلم أو أجحل أو يجحل علي. So alhamdulillah, how's everyone today? Alhamdulillah. What I would like to do today, inshallah, is like we're still on the same tree, right? We're still on the same tree, but we're going to go out on a different branch a little bit today, inshallah. What I would like to do is just kind of give you an example of someone of this ummah, right? Someone of the nation of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who took time to purify himself. He took time to purify his nafs. And then he is, bearing witness to the proof of this science. And the reason why I like him, along with, like Imam Ghazali and some of the others, is because they wrote their own biographies, right? It's an autobiography. They wrote it themselves. Because what happens is sometimes when people write for you, right, what happens is that either they take away what they think is not important, or they exaggerate about what they think is important, okay? Whereas he specifically, and his name is Ahmed Ibn Ajeeba. He was from Morocco. And he wrote his own autobiography, and that's specifically what he said. I didn't want anybody to add something in exaggeration to my life story, nor did I want people to take away that which I could explain better myself. Okay? So, inshallah, that's why I'm just going to take some time and just talk about him today, inshallah, so that you have a proof of concept, right? Proof of concept is, once the work is done, you can say, oh, okay, this really works. Now, we have thousands, we have millions, right? Millions, possibly billions of people from this nation who have purified themselves spiritually, okay? And that's why I wanted to introduce you to the Ahlul Sufa. I wanted to introduce you to the Ahlul Sufa because they are the paragons of purity, all right? And what they achieved, despite their meager subsistence and their meager resources, is amazing, right? Like we all are utterly dependent upon the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. We are utterly dependent on the fiqh rulings of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu and Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, and on and on and on and on and on. But after them, there were generations of people that followed in their footsteps, okay? And, their stories are very similar. So inshallah, what I'm trying to do is today, I want to give you, this story. He has a really, really like proper upbringing and things like that. And inshallah, next week, I won't be here. I have to go to the Bay Area. But the following week, inshallah, the following week? I don't know. Anyway, the next time I'm here, inshallah, I want to give you an example of someone, who didn't, he was able to follow the same path, even though his beginning was much worse. His beginning was much worse. All right, and the reason why I think that's important in our time is because just the nature of our circumstances, we're going to be probably closer to that. Right? We have problems that the world has never had before. We have, just, what the youth are dealing with right now. No other generation of youth had to deal with that before. Just social media. No other group of people ever had to compete against pictures from all over the world. Millions and millions and millions of digital pictures on what is supposed to be normal, or what is not normal, or what is supposed to be satisfaction. That has never existed before. And now children are, they're looking at these pictures and they get this worldview from outside of the tradition. So that you may find that the children stray. You may find that, all right? And so you have to make room for that. In other words, you have to make room for them to make mistakes, but you also have to come back, all right? In a way that has never happened before. In a way that has never happened before, okay? So, Sidi Ahmed Ibn Ajeeba, he has a very, very special place in my heart, and I wanted to introduce you to him. I've benefited immensely from his books. I mean, he has like commentaries on the Quran. He's an amazing scholar. But the very first thing to know about him is that he is a direct descendant of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Direct descendant of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you should just know, right, that you'll find the descendants of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in every Muslim country. You'll even start finding them here in America. All right? Like I know some that are here in America. Direct descendants of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? And one of the things that you'll find from them especially is like they have a certain spiritual authority. Not all of them, okay? Not all of them. Now, I'm not making that claim. But what I'm saying is that when you look at the awliya who like really, really stand out, you'll find that at the front is always one of the descendants of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And does anybody has ever heard of Abdul Qadir al-Jilani from Baghdad? Anybody heard of him? Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Direct descendant of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from both sides, from the Hassani side and the Husseini side. No one will argue with you about his status in Islam and his status as a wali of Allah. No one will argue with you about that. Okay? And why? Like, how did this happen? Don't forget this verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is in Surah Al-Ahzab, verse number 33. Okay? A'udhu billahi min shaitanir rajim. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is the address that Allah gave to them. He said, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمْ رِجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرُكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. Surely Allah wants to remove from you rijs, filth, impurity. This is Allah saying what He's going to do with the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Quran. And then he says them, Ahl al-Bayt. So there's no misunderstanding about who they are. And then he says, وَيُطَهِّرُكُمْ, and purify you. Tathira, a complete purification. This is the beginning of the affair. So the descendants of these pure people have a very special place, and that's why they are sabiqun. They're at the front when we're talking about purification. Okay? So Sidi Ahmed Ibn Ajeeba is one of these descendants. All right? So, and just a point that I want to make right here is that part of loving Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and loving his family, this is deen. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. This hadith is recorded in the Mustadrak of Imam Hakim, the Sunan of Imam At-Tirmidhi, the Al-Kabir of Imam At-Tabarani, and Imam Al-Bayhaqi in his Shu'ab Al-Iman. And he says, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying, love Allah because of what He gave you from His blessings. So that's at the top of the list. You have to love Allah. You have to love God. The top of the list. And then he says, love me because of the love of Allah. So this has a couple of meanings. It means that if you love Allah, you automatically have to love who Allah loves. He's Habibullah. How can you love Allah and not love who Allah loves? Right? And also, then he goes on to say, love my Ahlul Bayt because of my love. Yes, 100%, just like she said. Right? So this is a clear hadith about loving Allah, loving Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then loving the descendants of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, it's clear. So that's why I'm going in this vein. Okay, Sidi Ahmed Ibn Ajeeba, he was born in the 1700s, 1747. That's another reason why I picked him, is because he's closer to our time. Right? Like if we go back 1,000 years, where everything is totally different, it's totally different. Right? So he was born in 1747 and he died the first 10 years of the 1800s. Okay? Ladies, his mother told him when he became old enough to understand that she prayed for him while he was in the womb. She prayed for him. And you'll see that this prayer bore fruit. He puts in his, it's called Fahrasa. Fahrasa is autobiography. He puts in there that his mother said, after she knew that she was pregnant, after every prayer, she asked Allah, give me virtuous progeny. Make my descendants virtuous, righteous. Okay? And she said, and he said that she would do this especially during Ramadan. Right? Because this is when prayers are really answered. Okay? During Ramadan. And then she told him, she said, once he got in the habit of seeing her pray, and he would hear the adhan for prayer, if she didn't pray, he would tell her, Mama, go pray. He's 3, 4 years old. If she didn't do it, he would cry until she did. Okay? So she's getting what she asked for. Okay? From the very beginning, she begins to see, oh, okay, this is the response. Once he reached the age of reason, which is about 7 years old, right? About 7 years old, children can begin to discriminate between right and wrong, good and bad, right? Right around that age. He didn't like to miss prayers. But kids, they make a lot of mess in wudu. They go and they make wudu and they make a big mess. And so she stopped him and told him, I'm going to teach you a different way. So she taught him how to make tayammum. Right? And he complains about that in his autobiography. He says, I was doing this for years and I did not know that all my prayers were invalid. Even though he was only 7 years old. Right? He said later on he figured out, tayammum, when there's water available, tayammum is not valid. Right? To make the ablution, to wash up using dust. All right? And then he begins to describe his life. He says, from the time I was going to the maktab, so this is preschool and elementary school. From the time I would start going to the maktab, I would start going to Fajr at the mosque. He lived in a village. It was a very small village. So it wasn't like, dangerous, like he had to drive far to go to the mosque. It wasn't like that. He lived in a village, probably 50, 60 families, right? Everybody knows each other. Everybody probably goes to one masjid, right? So he said, I would go. But he had a special distinction in that he didn't used to play with the other kids. Anybody know the story of Imam Nawawi? Imam Nawawi? He was the same way. Imam Nawawi, that was what he was known for. As a child, he was known for not playing with the other children. And once someone asked him, why don't you go and play with the other children? And he told them at a young age, he said, that is not what I have been created for. Imam Nawawi. So here you have Sidi Ahmed Ibn Ajeeba. He has this, okay, so why is that important? Why am I mentioning Imam Nawawi? Because you will find his books in every single Muslim house. Riyadh al-Salihin. Right? He took all of those hadith on character and virtue and all of those things, and he simplified it for Muslims, compiled it for Muslims. Right? About 700 years ago. His Riyadh al-Salihin in every house. If you don't have Riyadh al-Salihin, then for sure you know about the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi. Right? It's in every house. So, and he lived a very short time. Imam Nawawi passed away in his 50s. But what he was able to do in those 50 years is amazing because of his dedication to Allah and His Messenger. Okay? Sallallahu alayhi. So, he said in his Fahrasa, Ibn Ajeeba, he said, the women of the other children would tell him, go play with the kids. And they would reprimand him and say, go play. Why? But he said, I just loved solitude. I just like to be by myself. And even though he was a child in a small village, he would find ways of educating himself. So as an adolescent, so now we're talking about 12 years old, at around the age of 12 years old, he comes across a fiqh book, Al-Qurtubiyyah. This is a very famous fiqh book in the Maliki school, which in Morocco, that's all they have. They only have the Maliki school. That's most of, for 1,000 years, that's the only school that they've taken. All of the judges and the qudat and the imams and, like they're very, very Maliki. Very, very Maliki. Okay? And so he found this fiqh book and he said, anybody who's read a fiqh book, it's hard to read fiqh books. Right? It's not like I'm reading a novel. It's very, very detailed. Very, very detailed. What type of water can you use for wudu? What type of water can you not use for wudu? Can you use juice from a plant? Can you use, or from a fruit? What if you just mix a little bit of peppermint plant into the water? Can you still use it for wudu? Like the fiqh books cover that in detail. So for somebody at 12 years old to read that says a lot about him. But he said he loved the book because it described perfectly for him how to make the prayer properly. At 12 years old. At 12 years old. All right? And that's how he said, that's how he learned the rules of the prayer. His grandfather began to teach him to read the Holy Quran. He said it took him 5 years to learn Holy Quran. Memorize it, right? Memorize, right? Not learn how to read it. He memorized the whole thing. So by the time he was 17, he had memorized the Quran. And then he said that he would go to the marketplace, not to shop, but he was looking for people who could give him the masail of the deen. He would always have questions. So he would go looking for people that could give him the questions. And he names these teachers in his fahrasa, right? This is I meant to make some copies and show you his isnad back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he was descendant from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and like some of his teachers, but I forgot. Ya Rabb. So he said, I would go to the marketplace and I would just kind of sit around the marketplace waiting for people to come out of the masjid, waiting for people that I knew were scholarly. And then I would go and I would ask them questions and I would walk with them as long as I could. Like if they were going home, I would walk with them until they got to the house. Or if they were coming from the house, going to the marketplace, I would walk with them, right? But he's what's the word? He has avarice for the deen. He's greedy to learn the deen. That's what he wants. He's very greedy. So then he mentions what happened. He says, I was 17 and a faqih, a very famous faqih, came to his village to visit some of his family. And people knew who he was. They were like, oh, the faqih. Faqih is, someone who knows Sharia at a deep level. Very, very deep level. So everyone knew who he was and people were coming to meet him. He said as soon as he got a chance, he said after the Maghrib prayer, he sat with the faqih from Maghrib all the way past Isha. And he said he just asked him question after question after question after question after question, trying to put together all these little snippets of information that he got from this person in his village, this person in his village, this person in his village. And finally the faqih looked at him and said, like, who are you? What's your family? Like, where are you from? So he explained who he was, from the Ajeeba family. And he said, someone like you cannot stay in this village. You have to come to my school. Someone like you, I'm going to pay for it. Okay? This is very similar to what happened with Abu Yusuf and Imam Abu Hanifa. Most of the writings that we have in the Hanafi school come from actually Abu Yusuf. Not Imam Abu Hanifa, but his number one student. And his student was poor. Abu Yusuf was very poor. So first, but Abu Hanifa saw in him, oh, he's very smart. He has the same avarice for the deen. You come to my study circle. So, but when the father found out, because the father is poor, the father finds out that he's going off to study. He's like, no, I need him in the shop, right? So Abu Hanifa, who was rich, decided to pay for his schooling. Abu Hanifa said, I'm going to pay for your schooling. But he did it in such a way that the father wouldn't feel, like he was getting a handout, He would have people like go to the, to the marketplace, to the shop, and buy things. He would give the money to the man secretly, so that Abu Yusuf could go and study. So this is what this person is doing, the same exact thing. I mean, if you, that's a whole nother topic, like who is Abu Yusuf in Islam? That's a whole nother topic. But you should know, like he was the first Qadi al-Qudat of the, of the Abbasid Empire, the Abbasid Caliphate. He was the judge of judges of the whole Muslim empire. Okay? Like he was that sharp. Okay? Okay. So, his mother lets him go. He goes to study with the faqih. The faqih has he called it Qasr al-Kabir. Qasr means like castle, right? Like a castle. And a Qasr al-Kabir, you usually find them like, in bigger villages, right? They're more like a small city, very, very small city. So he said, I went to the Qasr al-Kabir and I began to study. And then he starts naming all the books. He names all the books that he studied. But the first thing, the way he began studying, even his teacher called him al-Bahli, the madman, because of how he took to the knowledge. He just took to it, and he would study all night. He would sleep, just 3 hours, then 3 hours for study, then 3 hours for worship. That's what he would do. And when his teacher saw what he was doing, he started calling him al-Bahli, like, you're Majnun, you're crazy. Okay? And so then he said, he did this for 6 years. 6 years. He was able to accomplish what might take someone Now, if someone were to take the same course of study, you're talking about 20 to 25 years. Okay? 20 to 25 years. So just listen to this. He studied the Ajrumiyya. Ajrumiyya is an introductory text to Nahu, Arabic grammar. That's the beginner's text. Okay? Has anybody seen this text before? Huh? Yes, I know you have. Yes, I know. Right? Ajrumiyya. This is the introductory text to Nahu. And then after that, you have the Alfiyya, which is a 1,000-line poem on the rules of Arabic grammar. Do you know that there is more than a dozen ways that wow in the Arabic language can be understood? Just wow. You know what? You know how you say what? It means and in Arabic. But there's more than a dozen different ways of understanding that. When you see wow in the Quran or in Hadith, just that wow has many implications. And you have no business giving fatwa unless you understand some of these things. Just and. So he's saying, I studied Ajrumiyya, I also studied the Alfiyya. Just knowing that, you know, okay, he's on a mission. Okay? And then he tells us about his fiqh books that he studied. He says that he studied the Muqtasar Khalil. But he says about Muqtasar Khalil, which is like a medium level book in Maliki fiqh, right? So you would start off with, and some of you know, right? Some of you know. You start off with Aqdari, right? You know Aqdari, Grant, right? Right? Al-Aqdari. And then you might go to Murshid al-Mu'in. And then you come to Khalil. And then you end with Risala. This is a curriculum, right, of fiqh. It starts you off with very, very basic stuff. And then gradually you learn more and more and more of Sharia from these books. All right? He studied usul fiqh. Usul fiqh, you could basically say, is rules of engagement. You have to learn how to engage the Quran if you're going to try to understand it at a deeper level. If you want to take rulings from the Quran, you have to have rules of engagement. You have to know that there's a way to approach the Quran, there's a way to approach the hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that your desires don't get in the way. And whatever methodology that you have of deriving decisions, another scholar should be able to look at it and say, yeah, that will work. Let me give you an example. If you want to build an airplane, you have to, where's our brother? He always has the NASA jacket on. He's not here today? He's not here. Right? Huh? Oh, he's hiding? All right. Right? If you want to build an airplane, you have to have a methodology. You can't just start tinkering around in your garage and say you're building an airplane. Right? And whatever methodology you come up with, because there's different methodologies. You can go along with Boeing, right, which is up in Seattle. Or you can go with Airbus, which is in Europe. Or you can go with the other one in Brazil. I forgot they have another company down there. But each one of them has different ways that they build the airplane. And the pilots have to learn exactly how this airplane is built so that they can fly it properly. Would you get on an airplane that you don't know that there's there's a standard that the way this airplane was built? If your uncle just pulls up to the house on the wagon, he's got an airplane and he says, I built this, come on, let's go fly. Would you go? Right, you wouldn't go. And that's only talking about your dunya. You know that if you get in that thing, you can lose your life. That's just this world. You let somebody play around with interpretations of the Quran or interpretations of hadith without a deep level of understanding and learning, you're jeopardizing your dunya and your akhirah. So be careful. So he's letting us know what he studied so that we can know his level. We can understand where he's at. Okay? So he tells us in Usul, he studied Ibn Subki's Muqtasar. And then he tells us about the hadith. When in the chapter of how he studied, he tells us that he studied just the Sahih of Imam Muslim. Right? You'll find that in North Africa like Tunisia and Morocco and Algeria, they actually prefer the Sahih of Imam Muslim over the Sahih of Imam Bukhari. Right? They study both. But when it comes to preference, they prefer the Sahih of Imam Muslim. Different reasons, different topic. So he tells us that he went through just the Sahih Muslim 6 times with 3 different teachers. The whole thing. You're talking about almost 8,000 hadith. He's sitting with the teacher. He's reading to the teacher the hadith. And then the teacher explains to him what it means. All the subtleties, why this word is phrased this way, why the chapter is named this, why this, why this, why this. 6 times. And then he says he did the same thing with Bukhari. Deep study. He said that he studied the Shama'il of Imam Tirmidhi. The Shama'il is, Imam Tirmidhi put together a very blessed book. It's just talking about all the special characteristics and attributes of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? How he walked, how he talked, what kind of food he ate, what did his dress look like, what did his pillow look like, how did he used to sit on the floor. Like all those special characteristics, he compiled it. That's the Shama'il Tirmidhi. And then he tells us that he studied Tazkiyah also, what we're talking about now. This science. He's like, no, I studied it too. He studied tafsir. Not just the tafsir, but usul al-tafsir, which is how do you do tafsir on verses from the Quran? Okay? And then he talks about Aqidah, different books that he studied in the Muslim belief system. He did this for 6 years. Isolated from the world, and this is all he did. All right? Okay. In the next couple of chapters, one of the things that he does is at the beginning of every chapter, he kind of like gives you analogy to let you know where he's going. Because in the very next chapter, after he gives you all his background and all of his learning, he tells you, he says, know that the fruit of knowledge is action. Whatever you learn, I'll come to you. Whatever you learn, it doesn't mean anything unless you put it into practice. It doesn't mean anything. Okay? And then he says, the fruit of action is state. So once you start doing it, how you know that you're actually getting somewhere is that it produces a state in you. Okay? It produces a state. In other words, you start carrying a vibe with you because all of your actions eventually land on your limbs. And then he says, and the fruit of one's state is taste, dhawq, experience. So he's saying basically, first you need knowledge. That should lead to action. Otherwise, you're faking the funk. Your action leads you to a state or something's wrong. And then that state should lead you to some type of experience or something is wrong. That's what he's saying. All right? And now he's getting ready to tell us how he began to purify himself. But I wanted to give you that foundation so that you can know this is a serious scholar. He's a serious scholar. Okay? In his time, like he said, when he would go to the marketplace, people would descend on him, like people coming to the Ma'ida, people coming to the, or like you say in Urdu, Dasturkan, right? That's how people would come to him because he's someone who has knowledge, he's someone who has like they can see all those things on him. Number one, he has knowledge. He practices what he knows. And they can see on him, oh, he has that state. He has some humility. He has some sakina, some tranquility about him. That's what he is talking about. Sister, can I finish this? Because I'm already I just looked at the time. It's 37 after. Can I? And then I'll come to you, okay? Is that okay? All right. Okay. So this is what he says. Once I acquired that share that the share of Sharia, he said, once I acquired that share of exoteric knowledge that God had destined for me, I actively prepared myself to receive esoteric knowledge. So he's saying, I learned the Sharia, and now I'm preparing for basira, that inward spiritual sight that comes from practicing the outward law. Okay? And this is what he says. This preparation rests on the practice of religious law. For action cannot pass through, it cannot go from the exterior domain to the inner self unless the senses and the external faculties are held straight. So what's he saying? He's saying, what you do with your eyes affects your heart. What you do with your ears affects your heart. What you do with your tongue affects your heart. What you do with your limbs affects your heart. All of these, if these things are not held straight, forget about trying to fix your inward. It's not going to happen. That's what he's saying. He's saying you have to know what's right. You have to put it into practice in order for it to pass from outside of you to inside of you. That's what he's saying. Okay? And then there's a play on words here. In Arabic, he says, Ash-Sharia al-Bab. Wal-Haqiqa iyab. He's saying, the Sharia is the doorway. The law of God, that's the doorway. And the spiritual realities that you get is the return. Right? This is what he's saying. So he's saying, first have your capital. Have your capital. Then you can make a profit. So he's saying, the outward practice of Islam, Salat, Zakat, Ramadan, Hajj, that's your capital. You're not going to make a spiritual profit if you don't have that first. It's not going to happen. You put that into practice, you'll start to see your profit in spirituality. Huh? This is what he's saying. All right? So this is what he said. He said that he's continued in this way until he came across the Hikam of Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari. Has anybody know this book? Anybody saw this book, the Hikam? It's a very, very spiritual book. It's really a book of Aqidah, but it's an amazing book. That's all I can say. It's an amazing book. So he says that he came across this book after studying all this other stuff. He said he came across the Hikam, and it had a profound effect on him. And it just made him want to just focus on his spiritual life. Right? He said just made him want to focus on his spiritual life. So I'll just give you an example of like some of the Hikam is just like 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 phrases. Sometimes it's in the form of a poem. Most of the time it's in the form of a poem, right? But the meanings are profound. And it's like you can just read one and contemplate on that one for the whole day. And the whole book is probably filled with maybe 300 of them, what they call aphorisms. And so one of them is like this: how can the heart be illuminated while the forms of creation are reflected in its mirror. Right? Right, I saw you. What does that mean? I saw you. Right? So that's what he's saying. He said, how do you expect your heart to have this light of Allah in it, and you spend all your time with other than Allah? Right? Whatever you do, it affects you spiritually. Every movie you watch, it takes its place in your heart. Every movie you watch, it takes its place in your heart. How do you expect the nur of Allah to grow there when it's occupied with other than Him? That's what he's saying. How do you expect that? This is one aphorism in the Hikam. He's just asking you a question and you have to reflect on it like, yeah, how do I expect that? How is it not going to happen? Right? Another one that he says is, how can its journey, meaning the heart, how can its journey to God, how can it journey to God while it's shackled with its passions? If you are a slave to your passions, and your passions may be just you sleep too much, but if you're shackled by that, you can't get up at night and pray, well, how are you going to arrive to be near to Allah? How? It's not going to happen. This is what he's saying. These are the aphorisms that are in the Hikam. Okay? And so he read this book and he just was like, I got to do something more. So he goes on to say, he said he made, for 3 to 4 years, he did intensive dhikr. Intensive dhikr. He would spend all of his time, if he wasn't busy, because by this time he's not married yet. Eventually he gets married. But at this time he's not married. But for 3 to 4 years, he's just doing dhikr. Dhikr. Every time that he has, he's just, La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And then he said, then I started doing salawat ala nabi. Does anybody know the book Dala'il Khairat? The Dala'il Khairat? This is probably the most famous book of salawat on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Muslim world. Right? And it's divided into 7 days. You read one portion every day. And it's like, you know, oh Allah, send prayers and blessings upon Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as much as there is bubbles in the sea. Oh Allah, send prayer, right? And so he said, I began to read this book until I memorized it. I have this book at home. It's probably about 100 pages long. Both, Arabic and English. Yes, Dala'il Khairat.
I'm not going to remember that. Can you write that?
Yes, inshallah. Okay, all right. But then he goes further. Now remember, he's already hafiz of Quran. He's already hafiz. He has already memorized the whole book. Memorized it. By the time he's 17. But then he says, I wish to possess the Quran. Meaning, I wanted it to fill my inward. I wanted me and the Quran to be just like one. So he said, I began to read it tirelessly. I read it in prayer, standing up. Me either. Standing, sitting. He said that he would finish it 14 times in a month. Right. You see, now you know his level. Right? And 14 times in 1 month. So that basically means that he would finish it almost twice in a day. In prison, I met brothers like this. Wallahi. They could read the whole Quran in 1 day. Wallahi, I'm telling you the truth. Okay? So I know it's possible. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So a scholar who has this yearning to realize his human potential to be a wali, it's nothing for him. Okay? And then he said I would read the commentary so I knew exactly what it is that I was reading. But not only that, you know, there's different ways of reciting the Quran. right? Different ways of reading. So there's 7 different qira'at. So he said, I plunged into that so I can know the 7 different ways of reciting the Quran. Now, what does he say? I can see right now, I am not going to finish this. Okay, so we'll go to right here, then I'll answer some questions. But I'll say this. This is what he said. Number 1, he said, he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam several times during this period. So just reflect on that for a second. He's an alim, right? He's an alim. He has the highest level of learning. He's well known for his learning in his land. We know that because of the curriculum, we know that he's Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Like, we know this. Okay? And he's telling you, I saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam several times. Several times. Listen. Never mind. I'll just say this. You want to see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in your dream? Because remember, when you see him, you see him. Shaitan cannot imitate his form. You want to see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Increase your salawat ala nabi. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Increase in your salawat ala nabi. All right? But he also says that during this period, that he would see lights shining. Right? He would see light shine. He's not talking about this artificial light. He's not talking about that. Right? He's talking about angelic light that he saw. He said, I saw light shining. I saw ornaments, palaces, all different types of Allah's creation during this time. But he says, and this is very important, I turned away from it. Because that's not his goal. His goal is Allah. And just because Allah lifts a veil and allows you to see things that are beyond your physical sight, your normal physical sight, you don't get caught up in that. You move past that. But he saw that. Now, how do we understand this? And I'll end with this. How do we understand this? And I'm only halfway through the story. But how do we understand this? I'm going to give you a framework so that you can understand miracles of the Salihin, of those people who are righteous. In the book, Aqidah Tahawiyah. Aqidah Tahawiyah is the most famous, read, taught, and studied book on Aqidah in the Muslim world. You'll find it in every Muslim madrasa. I've seen the curriculums from Malaysia, Indonesia, they have it there. It's definitely in Azhar, right? It's in Qarawiyyin. Some of my teachers from Mauritania, matter of fact, it was a teacher from Mauritania that taught it to us, right? It's just on what we believe as Muslims. And there's a section in there where he talks about who are the awliya, the friends of God, right? And how do we understand their miracles that they have, right? And so he says, Imam Tahawi, who's one of the very, very early Muslims, right? He says, وَنُؤْمِنُ بِمَا جَاءَ مِنْ كَرَامَاتِهِمْ وَصَحَّ عَنْ ثِقَاتِ مِنْ رِوَايَاتِهِمْ. He says, we believe, he's talking about the awliya, the friends of Allah, men like Ahmed Ibn Ajeeba. He says, وَنُؤْمِنُ, we believe بِمَا جَاءَ مِنْ كِرَامَاتِهِمْ. We believe in those miracles that have come from them. وَصَحَّ عَنْ ثِقَاتِ مِنْ رِوَايَاتِهِمْ. As long as they are transmitted to us by reliable men. Okay? So, if you hear about a wali that has performed a miracle, don't doubt it. We have an understanding in our aqidah that this is normal for them. All right? For him to put it in the aqidah book more than 1,000 years ago, because it was a question. And so they put it in the book that Muslims have been studying for over 1,000 years. Okay? So I'm going to stop right there and see if there's any questions. And yes. Assalamu alaikum. So, I'm sorry.
I have this question.
Bismillah.
You know, when someone sees the Prophet
Sallallahu alaihi wasallam
in their dream, how do they know that it's the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Because it's not like, okay, I've seen someone before, and then I see them in my dream, then I know, okay, yeah, that's, but like we've never seen the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when you see someone, how do you know it's the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is an excellent question. Okay? And I will just tell you, you will know. I'm saying that without any doubt. You will know. Because this is an inner affair. This is a spiritual affair. And the place that he has in your heart will tell you this is not like the rest of Allah's creation. This is a prophet. This is a messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So that's my first answer. My second answer is read his description. Read it so that you know, right? One of the best descriptions that we have is from Ali ibn Abi Talib when his son, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anh, and his son, I believe it was Hassan radiallahu anh, asked him, how was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And he began to describe him. Oh, he was tall, but not very, very tall. Right? He was like this. He was this color, but not like this color. Right? It's a beautiful description. It's probably the best description that we have of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So study that. Right? But that's just to make your heart firm. But believe me, you will know. You will know. Okay. One more question. She asked a long time ago. All right.
I was just wondering, this imam of the studying intensity, how did he earn a living?
Yeah, so scholarship. His teacher gave him the scholarship. That's what we would call it today, like a scholarship. And that's what communities do. I know communities that put together money so that people can go and study. Right? That's what happened with me coming out of LA in the 90s. I went to go and study. Some brothers put together some money. It was me and a couple other brothers. We went to go study. Right? And that's what we're supposed to be doing. Every community is supposed to say, all right, let's send 2 or 3 brothers. Let's send 2 brothers, let's send 2 sisters, let's send them to Azhar, and we're all going to pay for their tuition for the next 4 or 5 years. And when they come back, the agreement is, when they come back, they teach. That's what we're supposed to do. Okay, this is the last question.
Okay, so the Prophet
Sallallahu alaihi wasallam
says that there should be a balance in life, one hour for life and 1 hour for worship.
Yes.
How did he maintain, how did the man you were talking about maintain this kind of balance?
So remember that in that particular hadith that you're talking about, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is talking to people that have a lot of responsibilities, right? He's talking to people. He's saying, if you have a family, you have to give some time to your family. If you have this, you have to give some time for this. If you have that, you have to. This was a student. He had no marriage. He didn't have a wife. He didn't have a business. And eventually, the only thing that he was doing was teaching. So that's all he had time for. But we're going to get into that when he gets married, because he actually gets married to more than one wife, and he tells us all the problems he begins to have. And then you can then ask me that question, right? Like, how did he maintain the balance? Because he tells us, he's just honest. He's very, very honest in his fahras. He just tells us, you know what I mean? He tells us one time my wife came and I brought some cheese into the house, and because she was angry, she took the cheese and she stomped on it, and I had just sat down, so she picked up the like the big cheese, like, and she picked it up and she threw it at him. He said, I just sat down and it hit me on my head and my head against the wall, but I was patient. We're going to get there, inshallah. All right? So inshallah, we'll start here the next time I'm here, inshallah. Subhanallah bihamdihi, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursalin. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.